Hello everybody and welcome. I'd say welcome back because technically this is part of the Honest Q&A series. This is the pinnacle, but no, welcome to the beginning of the tier list, the beginning and the end. We are going to go from bottom to top. We're going to be talking through all of your favourites and potentially least favourite people in the Resident Evil Resistance community, one by one, F to S plus, and we'll see what you make of it by the end of it. I fully expect nobody will be 100% happy with the list, but that's why it's my opinion only. Do not take anything I say to heart, I beg of you. This is ultimately my opinion on everybody in the community. Well, not everybody, I've got about 50 plus of you here. But a good amount of the notable players in the community, people close to me, and just great players in general. But back to the point, as I say, whatever the outcome is here, just because I think you are a D rank instead of a C rank does not mean I think you're an awful human being. So it's not that deep. Just have fun with it, and we'll see how it goes, eh? Anyway, we'll get straight into it because we've got a lot of people to talk through here, and we're not going to get an easy start either. We are going to start with the F tier, and how this is going to work tier by tier is that even within the individual tiers, I will be listing them. So, for example, if you are bottom in the F tier, or mentioned as last, then you are the worst player in the F tier. And if I mention you as the final player in the F tier, you are the best player in the F tier. Now, these orders can change. In some tiers, I may decide to read the best player out first and the worst player out last, all just because. But either way, I will make it clear who has been named, in what order, to make it clear to you all. Anyway, bottom of the F tier, the worst person in this tier list to start with. It's to no surprise to anybody who knows about him, but it is unfortunately Prometheus. Now, this guy gets an S plus tier in terms of commitment to not quitting matches, but unfortunately that is not what I'm judging it off of today, because for you who are unaware of Prometheus, he is a mastermind who has amassed well over 1,000 matches with Annette and Daniel. He's rank 110 plus with both of them. And basically, he only ever runs default equipment, so nothing. Default deck, even though he's unlocked all of those cards for Annette and Daniel, he still runs default deck. And yeah, unsurprisingly, I have beaten him every time. And I'd imagine most people, if not virtually anybody who plays in duo queue or more, will have a 100% win rate against him. So, if you haven't faced him yet, I'd be amazed. This guy has been playing for a while now. But nevertheless, he does never quit. I have to emphasize that, so credit to him. But in terms of a player-to-player tier list where I rank people on how good they are at the game, there's not much I can give him in the way of credit here. So unfortunately, Prometheus will open us up, but open us up in style. Anyway, second bottom, people will know him. It's Brandon Cruz 99, for those who need an extra bit more detail. Look, Brandon's a player who has fun with the game. He isn't the sweatiest person ever, and unfortunately that does translate into him not being the best player ever either. He has his moments with Tyrone. Never ask him to play Becca, or that could lead to some debilitating calls to never let him play Becca again. But no, he's unfortunately in this case second bottom. There's not much to say about Brandon. Fun guy to play with, horrible guy to play with if you're against a good mastermind. third bottom, we are sticking with people I know closely. It's Niu Piu. She mains Tyrone and Valerie. She hasn't played in a good while, but she was a pretty notable mainstay of Resistance at one point. She'd, appear every day, every 2 days. You'd always see her playing with people and being around. She had fun with the game. She loved using Val and Tyrone a lot. Unfortunately, she did have the tendency to die a lot, and obviously that is never a good thing, but, when she's playing the healer and she goes down, it's not the best thing at the end of the day. Nika, though, as I say, good fun, but again, these bottom 3 players, they all have a tendency to get absolutely steamrolled at the worst of times. But in Nika's defense, she does definitely have a bit more competency than, say, Brandon, for example. Up next is another one of my closer friends, people who might not be known outside of my more inner circle. It's sometimes been called a bit of a circle jerk, but that could not be further from the truth. It is Natty91. Now, Natty is a very committed Val main. I believe she's over 600 now. And in some matches, her skill set does actually come in handy. She runs counterattack, she'll always have grenades at hand, and again, sometimes she'll pull something clutch out of nowhere without even meaning to. She's a fun person to play with. She'll always take Val duty for starters, so that's always appreciated. But again, as we've said with other people near the bottom of this tier list, they have a tendency to die a lot, and that is not out of the question for Natty either. She does also play Mastermind a bit. She likes her ambush and net. She does dabble in a bit of Daniel, but again, she isn't anything notable on the Mastermind front either. Next up, we're going to be spreading our wings a little bit more again, and we'll be going towards Winchester. It pains me to say this, to be honest. Winchester is, quite honestly, one of my most committed watchers and subscribers. But when it comes to a tier list, I ultimately cannot put somebody higher because they like my videos and give me support. Winchester's been around the block for a while now, and every now and then he does show a modicum of potential. But at the same time, you'll be surprised by him in one match, and then for the next 10 matches in a row, he'll just have a complete meltdown. He might rage quit, he might just have a real bad off day, get his cam shot out as Nikolai once against a good Jan, and then his whole game plan crumbles. I do think there is a decent player in there in Winchester, but ultimately half of this game is to do with how cool you do stay under pressure, and in Winchester's case, he does not excel in that area. And to conclude the F tier, we have Genji. This guy has been playing Resistance consistently from the early days. He honestly limits himself in this tier list purely because, as a lot of you may know, he doesn't run meta builds on basically anybody. His Alex runs, what is it called, his Area 2 build, I believe it was. His Nikolai has been known to use noxious compounds and reinforced leg holds mixed with normal leg holds. His Annette build he's passionate about, it's Poisonette. And the same goes for his survivors too. He'll run Kashima Tyrone, Speedrun Tyrone, mains Black Taurus Val, he experiments with Jan, Steelbat Jill. Ultimately, what I'm trying to say is that Genji has been one to go against the grain of the meta for a very, very long time. And I commend him for that. It's definitely good. You don't want everybody to play the same character and you know, just make everybody a carbon copy of each other. But ultimately, this is something that also limits him in a tier list. Anyway, we'll start to pick up the pace a little bit with the E tier. And I say pick up the pace because this is where things might start to get a little bit controversial, but nevertheless, I am here to take the bullets to the chest. That's what this is all about. It was the same with the Q&A, and we'll go again here. And I say this because I'm opening the E tier with one of my close friends, actually. It's Mike. Now, I know Mike's been quite worried about the tier list for a few weeks now. I didn't give anything away to him, partly because, you know, I want to keep the tier list confidential, partly because I've put Mike in the E tier. Mike's a fun guy when he's not raging, but ultimately he does have a lot of flaws in his game. He's still up there for Becca players, but unfortunately the Becca ceiling is much lower than the general resistance player base. So unfortunately, a guy who, you know, is scared of bioweapons, a guy who often didn't want to buy the Raiden when necessary, a guy who doesn't buy guns with his melee guys full stop. When it comes down to it, player v player, Mike just falls short, unfortunately. Do apologise to you, mate, but again, please don't take it to heart, because it's not meant to be that way. Moving on, we have Raccoon City 33. Now, I've been quite vocal about how I feel his Jill isn't exactly matching those better Jills. There's plenty of examples. Me, Darkness, Scooby, IDK, X. There's many I could list off who are better than him. And it's not even a case that I feel like those Jills are better than him. It's honestly that I feel like they are leaps and bounds above him. Raccoon doesn't pressure cameras against Nikolai's, but pressures them against Daniels. Raccoon often, again, like Winchester, can lose his head in the middle of a match, and then he just starts completely playing ridiculously. I do think there's a player in there in Raccoon, but again, when the temperament side of things is not up to scratch, that mixed with the lack of camera pressure, then ultimately, what a Jill has to do, Raccoon doesn't do half of it. So it's E tier for him. Third up in the E tier, so we are going up, remember, the first two are at the bottom of the E tier. We have Bridget. Now, Bridget's a lovely girl. Get on with her really well. She's fun to play with. Honestly, she'll never take a loss badly. Her Jan isn't meta. Let's just say that. She runs malware most of the time. It can hinder the team against a Nikolai. It is what it is. Bridget's a nice person to play with. She ultimately isn't one of the best players I play with, and that's why she's stuck in the E tier. But nevertheless, she, again, if she played more meta, maybe she could be higher. Up next is Mouse Evil. Again, I've been quite vocal about Mouse's shortcomings in part 1 of the Q&A, and I know I didn't exactly word that in the best of ways back then. You know, it hit a bit too close to home, it was a little bit brutal, so I won't go into detail here again, but ultimately, Mouse didn't ask to be left out of the tier list, so I've just got to go with what I think. That is E tier. Near the top of the E tier, admittedly, but it is what it is, and I've already been quite vocal as to why. And to round off the E tier, we have Ben Sanderson. Now, Ben is a player who can play a lot of survivors, but would I say he excels with any of them? Not particularly. He plays Val, Jan, and Jill an equal amount, and I'd say he has decent days with all of them, but also bad days with them. Ben also isn't a good loser. He admitted that himself, and that does affect a team's chemistry. And when I compare it one by one on paper, would I say Ben is better than Mouse? Yes, but not by much. Would I say he's better than Bridget? Yes, but not by much. So ultimately, E tier feels quite fitting for him. And now we go up to the D tier. We'll start with Duckman Sam. I believe he is actually quite overlooked by the community. He's never really played in sweaty teams, but his Jan does have good moments locked in the locker. Ultimately, Sam does also have really bad weak characters as well, but yeah, he does enough to push him above the likes of Mouse and Raccoon, who are ultimately still known as like respected or more mainstream players. So Sam taking up the start of D is hardly a slight on him. Up next is Firebird Fred. I've said that I think he's overrated. I stand by that. I believe that every so often in the right environment, Firebird Fred will do okay. I believe that if you are in duo or something with him, it's probably not going to go well. Yeah, he's also quite one-dimensional. He'll play Jill and do okay. But if you're an okay Jill, it's kind of the same as being an okay Becca. You're just a bit of a deadweight. If you are not an amazing Jill, why are you using her in a team? It just affects the harmony of the comp far too much. And that's why Firebird Fred is in the D tier. Midway through the D tier, we have Aruma G, actually. One of the very early big-name masterminds, probably the very first one. And yeah, back in the day, he was definitely something to be feared. He hasn't aged that well. Obviously, in real life, I'm sure that he hasn't got to like 80 years old within 3 years, but in a resistant sense, I mean, you know, back in the day, he'd stomp anybody and everybody. Nowadays, he can be competitive, he can get absolutely whitewashed as well. So midway through D feels about right. If I did this a couple years ago, maybe a tier higher. Up next is, well, after we named the first Croatian player a little bit ago, we will name another. Socre, 555. Good player, just a solid player. Would I say he's exceptional with anybody? No, but he'll play most characters. He'll play Mastermind. He's just a good staple in the community. He's just good there that randoms can beat him. He can also put up a fight against decent players. Will he ever beat a good SWAT team? Probably not. But Socrates' versatility gives him just enough credit to put him, you know, in a respectable position midway up that D tier. Second to top of the D tier is X-Darkness OG. I again mentioned him in the overrated players. I stand by that. He's better than Firebird Fred. He's better than Raccoon. He ultimately still doesn't have enough camera pressure. He isn't quite streetwise enough against better Nikolais. He has a good bioweapon down in him, but ultimately, again, as I said a few minutes ago, you need to be a fantastic Jill, or I'll penalise you, in this case, if you only main her. Darkness is, to be fair to him, a decent Jan as well, so points go to him there, but it's still not enough to, you know, push him into the upper tiers of this list. And to round off the D tier, we have Kairos Static, who is probably waiting for me to say his name. I think he's ultimately in a fair position. I could have put him in the F tier after all the controversy of the past few weeks, but D tier feels fair. He's versatile as Mastermind. I'd say only his Annette build is truly competitive, And even then, it's only competitive if he's against, like, the right team comp, you know? If they have, say, a Becca and then a USB melee guy. Otherwise, Joffrey is going to lose quite often. Most of his builds, they can be competitive and make the survivors work, but they're not going to put anybody in danger either that's in the higher tiers of this list. Terminal Spencer he's okay with, have also beaten it without USBs, so again, I can't give him too many points there either. And ultimately, if you're only half good, he's better than half good with a net. He is good, but if you're only good with a mastermind, you ultimately can't expect to be any higher than, well, just under halfway up the tier list. Anyway, on to the C tier, and we start with Joan of Arcade. Now, Joan, back in the day, I would actually rated her in the E tier. She has improved a lot. Her Martin is good. Her Valerie is good. Her Jan is serviceable. And yeah, she's a solid presence on a team. She's never going to win a match on her own, but again, the characters she plays as mean that she doesn't try to take that role up. So she feels fitting to be, you know, the halfway mark of this entire tier list, really. Up next is Jill Sandwich. Again, a good, consistent presence. Plays higher tier characters, or harder to play characters in higher tier matches, should I say, than Joan, which squeaks him above her. Would I say he has a true X factor about him? Not really. He'll always be in a match and doing things, but would I say he's gonna clutch it for you either? No. That's not a slight to him either. That's just how it is. Consistent presences are decent. C tier in this list is decent. But that's just where the tail of the tape ends, ultimately. Up next is the Postrian Polo. And I might as well group him in with the one I've put directly above him as well, Richie Woollett. Polo, I mentioned as one of the overrated players in my Q&As. Again, not overrated to the extent where he's flat out bad. C tier is serviceable. But I've mentioned Polo's weaknesses before against Infection and Alex, and having interesting ways where he approaches the map. And ultimately, that hurts him. And I also don't think he's as good as his friend Richie, who is more versatile with the characters he can play, and just generally a bit more streetwise about how he approaches matches. Up next is Storied Tortoise. Midway up the C tier, feels the perfect placement for him. Really good all-rounder. Again, is he going to beat Pep and Keck on his own? No. But he's a good player, very good with Val, good with Tyrone, solid with Jill, and I said myself, a very good Jan. And again, this isn't anything to be sniffed about being halfway up the C tier. Like, he's above people who have beaten Lin Kuei. So me saying his Jan is underrated, it still holds up here with me putting him in the C tier and halfway up. Really good player, really solid, would be even higher if he proved himself in those sweaty customs, but that's not for him, that is fair, and yeah, ultimately balances out to near the upper tier of the C list. Up next is Tacitus Kilgore, 36. I've waxed lyrical about her plenty of times in the Q&As, and ultimately she gets a good placement here in the tier list too. I believe she's a really, really good Martin, really, really good Val. Ultimately, she hasn't been in, again, the sweatiest custom games ever. That limits things, but she is a really good player, good potential, and could go up to B tier if she pushed her Martin all the way. Up next is Aoife. Now, this is probably the first one where people will start really thinking that that's a questionable shout. I stand by this one all the way. I love Aoife as a guy. Now, he's a lovely man. He's always been kind and polite to me. Do I think his main as Becca hinders him? Yes, quite dramatically. The fact that some of the teams he played in had to accommodate for him, it's not off to a good start in that regard. Aoife has had some good wins under his belt, undeniably. Like, there's a reason he's the best Becca, but Becca as a character is limited. Aoife, he's a really good player to have against the Nikolai. Like, if I had to pick a Becca against the Nikolai, it would be him. But I do believe it makes him a bit timid against creatures sometimes, and that's what a Becca needs to clean out most of the time. So ultimately levels out to top 3 in the C tier for Aoife. Still respectable, but I do think if he wasn't a 999 Becca, he wouldn't quite be held in as high regard as he mostly is. Second in the C tier is Sparing Pickle. Now, obviously, we've had a group of the more controversial people mentioned so far. I won't go over them again, but we'll wrap them up here really with Pickle. He's a good Jill. Let's just put it straight up. He's a good Jill, and that just puts him second place in the C tier. He is really good at killing bioweapons. He is just a good, consistent presence in the team. He can play another couple of characters as well. Would I say he's top 5 Jills? No. But we're now at the stage where the Jills I'm mentioning are real net positives to the team rather than, you know, having to be carried and they'll have a good day here and there. No, Pickle is consistently good with Jill and ultimately just falls shy of the B tier. As does Ruby Riches. Now, Ruby is good enough for the B tier. Definitely is. She is a very solid Valerie. She's a very solid Jan. She can even fill in as Jill quite amicably. She does run Yellow Boost on Val. Would I say that alone costs her a place in B tier? No. But at the same time, I do believe she has to, you know, keep proving that her Valerie is up to standard with that build before I say, yes, undeniably you're in B tier. Because the people I do have in B tier are some very, very consistent players. And we'll start off the B tier with Rayvern. Now, obviously he is a bold man who really tried to push the boundaries with Daniel. He made them work a lot of the time. He has some good wins on his CV. He's a good player. If he made Nikolai every game, I think he really could be even higher here. Like, B tier is a really good placement anyway, but to do it with Daniel and gun Daniel at that is very creative and very applaudable, really. So Rayvern might be bottom of the B tier, but it's a very big thumbs up to start the B tier off as well. Up next is El Pichiwu. Now, this man, probably the most improved player over the last year and a half. I've known him for about 2 years now. I bumped into him when he was Terminal Spencer, actually, and he was good. He was a good player as Jan, but at the same time, when he tried to take Jan off other people, I was like, now you're being like these Jills that, you know, can only play one character and aren't exactly so good that they'll carry a game on their own. But credit to Peachy, he has improved a hell of a lot over the years. He is honestly now upper tier January, and honestly the only thing that stops him being higher on this list is just a bit of a lack of versatility in his survivors. He's an excellent Jan. What else is he excellent with? I can't really say. So that limits him, but still, commendable from Peachy, who honestly would have been a tier lower a good year back. Up next is Aaron's. Now, Aaron's is really good with all of the girls to some degree. Really good with Jan, really good with Val, a good Jill, and yeah, good with Becca as well. Again, would I say that Aaron's is top tier with a single character? No, but we're at the stage of the tier list where the fact that Aaron's is good with multiple characters really holds a lot of weight. So really holds Aaron's and sinks them into the B tier in a really good, solid way. Next is Wolprez. Good Tyrone, solid survivor, but also known for his menacing Spencer back in the day. He's not quite as sweaty on Mastermind duty nowadays, but when he was at his peak and when he really wanted to sweat, Wolprez could go toe-to-toe with the best. Ultimately, he hasn't managed to show that consistency over many a year, so that does hurt him in the longevity factor, but I'm still giving him a really solid finish because of that ceiling he has. And next up in the B tier, halfway through it now, is Sims. Now, Sims is a well-loved player, is a very good Valerie. Would I say she is top tier with anybody else? No. So that limits her. Would I say her Valerie's truly elite? No. She's a good credit collector. She's a good healer. Would I say she's faultless? No. And when we're at the stage of the tier list that we are, and we see the players who are coming up, that does ultimately, you know, sink her. Well, not sink her, it stalls her in the middle of the B tier. Still a very good finish for her, finishes above some really good players, but I believe it's fair compared to who we have to come. Next up is Bam Margera Jan. Now, I know Bam was worried he wouldn't make the B tier. He wanted to be in the B tier. He is in the B tier. USB Jam, we know all about it. He makes it work. Is it truly intuitive? No. Does it still make matches against Terminal Spencers and Nikolai's harder? Absolutely, and that does limit him. However, he also makes it work to a standard where I give him credit too, and that ultimately levels out to a B. Mid-B, in the top 5 of B, ultimately. So look at it in a positive way. Bam is a very good player, one of the best Jans. The USB build does limit him, but it's not going to penalise him to the extent where I drop him down a whole tier or anything. Next up, French Reaper. Really good Sam. Unintuitive Sam as well, but he makes it work. Good Jill, good Jan, good Tyrone. Yeah, French Reaper has a good few bases covered. He's a really good Martin, actually. Him and Sam are his top 2, and then the others are serviceable. Would I say French Reaper is in that elite class? Not quite. Not quite. I think he's a really good player. I think his Sam individually is one of the very best Sams. Having said that, his rather clunky approach to his builds and the weapons he uses at times, again, they don't make it purely the easiest journey for him. It's a bit like Bam with the USB stuff. These are 2 excellent players, but if they played pure meta, like pure 100% meta, then they could be a couple of places higher in the B tier. Ultimately though, still really good players, just it levels out, and French Reaper takes 4th in the B tier. In 3rd place in the B tier is myself. I was wondering where to put myself. I believe this is a fair placement. I believe I can play Sam to a high level, Jan to a high level, Jill as well. And I'll gladly take Valerie out for a day in the park. I don't know what that means. But I'll gladly play most characters, is my point. Again, what limits me from being in the A tier is, am I truly top tier with anybody? No. I'd say I'm like half a point below for Jill and Jan. I'd say I'm 8.5 rather than a 9. But yeah, again, I play meta characters, meta builds. I'm good with Jan, Jill, and Sam. That's ultimately enough versatility for a top 3 place in B, as far as I'm concerned. And speaking of versatility, we'll round off the B list by mentioning the top 2 kind of together here. We have Jared in second and Knight of Ren in first. So Jared, very good Tyrone, very good Valerie, can play Sam well as well. He's known to be good with his leadership skills, you know, in party chats and stuff like that. Would I say Jared is on the level of Conqueror, for example? No, that's why I have him below him. But ultimately, Jared can fill a gap in a team where needed. He's a good player. And so is Knight of Ren. He's an excellent Valerie. Would I say he has quite enough versatility? He's not as versatile as Jared. He's not as versatile as me. He's better than me and Jared, but the lack of versatility means that he doesn't quite creep into the A tier.
Oh my god. Okay. Cool.
And speaking of the A tier, we get that started with Peter Zay, or Pietro, as some people would call him, the Nikolai main. Now, this guy was insanely talented. The fastest Nikolai on cams I've seen, bar none. He had really good aim, really fast, as I say. His downside, just that he didn't want to face the best team. He'd face virtually everybody, but he wouldn't face Dominic. And that is where it falls flat. I believe Pietro had the potential to be the single best Nikolai in the game. Unfortunately, he didn't quite prove that to us, so his ceiling is the bottom of A. Following him is Cody Lodi, a well-respected player from the earlier days, the first year and a half of the game. I wasn't around enough to have witnessed his heyday, like live in person on a team with him. I played with him a few times, but obviously I've mostly had to look at footage of him. I've overall been really impressed. He plays Val great, Sam great, and yeah, he can fill in a gap where needed to. Really good player, unsurprisingly in A tier. And the same goes for Conqueror, really, unsurprisingly in A tier. Fantastic Tyrone. He can play most characters, to be honest. Like, his versatility is quite overlooked. Tyrone's his main boy, though. Does a great job with him. Tyrone himself has limits, I believe, so if you purely play him, like 90% of the time, then I think, you know, you're not quite showing off your full repertoire of skills. But still, Conqueror is a great player, and rightfully, very firmly in the A tier. Next up, we go into the top 3 of the A tier, and we'll start with Pep and Keck. Now, Pep was a well-known Sam main, switched to Tyrone in the end. I believe his gameplay suffered when he moved over to Tyrone. He evidently didn't enjoy it as much. He kind of just took over the role as bullet sponge and, you know, just made his Tyrone chunky so it wouldn't die, and he'd eat yellows and hit stuff. He did a good job with that. But when you ask me for the hardest roles in the game, would I say that Pep is a bit protected by the teams he played in? Honestly, yes. I believe that his Samuel is an amazing creature killer, and don't get me wrong, he had an encyclopedic knowledge of how to play against a Nikolai, because he played Nikolai. On that note, I do think his Nikolai, although very, very good, was nowhere near as good as, well, Pietro, for example, who only played Nikolai, hence why he's below him, or other Nikolais that I'll end up mentioning shortly. But yeah, Pep, I think it levels out to high A. Again, undeniably a great player, but if he purely mains Sam from the start to the end, I think I'd push him higher. The fact he took Tyrone honestly makes me sad. I know he did it for the better sake of the team, but he lost his identity a bit in the process, and yeah, it's a shame. Still a great player, could have been even higher in my personal opinion. Up next, we have Lin Kuei. I know a few of you will be saying, what? But it is the case. Lin Kuei is second in the A tier. Again, what I just said with Pietro kind of rings true here. Pietro didn't finish higher because, well, he didn't want to face Dominic, but he also only played Nikolai. Lin Kuei, when you go through it, survivor-wise, Lin Kuei is a serviceable Jan. His Val, I haven't seen. His Tyrone is okay. His Samuel, below average. His Jill, okay. His Becca, okay. His Martin, I've never seen. I don't think he's ever touched him. And then when it comes to Masterminds, obviously as Nikolai, he's top tier. That's undeniable. But for other Masterminds, his Annette, honestly not good. His Daniel, competitive, but not Raven. His Alex, good, but not Ex Nihilo or Rat Labs by any stretch of the imagination. His Spencer, solid. It's mainly his Nikolai that he falls back on, and understandably so. He's really, really, really good with Nikolai. He's beaten everybody with Nikolai. Would I say he's the fastest Nikolai on cams? No, I've already said that's Pietro, and to me it's undeniable. But Lin Kuei just played Nikolai the most. He's got the most experience. He's got the most consistent aim. So yeah, it just works out to an undeniable high A tier. But compared to the other names I'm looking at on my screen right now, you know, you still need a bit more than that. And speaking of a bit more than that, Ex Nihilo wraps up our A tier. X is a brilliant Jill. He's really, really good with Val, actually. And he can fill in as most characters. Would I say he is purely as clutch as the other players to come? No. But he's just a really excellent player. Very consistent. And you ultimately always need consistency in a team rather than always having the flashy show ponies who are going to get you 20s or kill a bioweapon without fail. And Ex Nihilo is the good, consistent presence who will rarely let you down. Into the S tier now, and we start with IDK. IDK, he is just brilliant. Like, podium finishing Jill, undeniably.
No, yeah, true.
Ridiculously accurate with sniping, killing bioweapons. His cam pressure is unmatched. Like, I watched this guy on Bemusement, and he just had everything worked out a step or two before it happened. Incredible aim, incredible consistency, and he's always calm under pressure as well. Like, he will, even in a high pressure bioweapon drop, he'll always somehow make something stick. And that is really important. He's probably the single most clutch Jill at killing things. Next up is Data Scorpion. We know about him, the Nullify King, as Valerie, does everything else well as well with her. Nullify stands out. He could beat Trap Alex's on his own, quite honestly, and that's not an easy thing to do. But he's an excellent player, one of the best Vals. But speaking of the best Val, we have Violet. Now, Violet is well loved. She had in and out periods on the game, but ultimately, the way she positioned herself for heals, the way she'd always make sure the team's economy is stable and, well, more than stable, just very healthy. Those overlooked things, she always got spot on. Very consistent and solid pillar of any SWAT team. And to me, the best Val without question. Second in the S tier is Dark X Toxicity. Now, this guy can play virtually any survivor. When I think about it, he's a really good Val, really, really good Jan, excellent Samuel, one of the best. He can play Tyrone to a good standard. His Jill is very good. His Martin is serviceable. And his Becca can fill in a gap as well. And then that's not the end of the story. Dark is just an all-round good mastermind. His Nikolai is obviously great on its own, but the fact he's a great Nikolai and also a really good Annette and also really good with other builds like Terminal Spencer, he's great with as well. Dark has virtually every base covered. I wouldn't say he's the most versatile player in the game. We have a couple more to go in that regard, but he's excellent with virtually everybody. Wrapping up the S tier is Scooby Gamer 1, the best Jill, one of the best Jans. That's all I really need to say. I've waxed lyrical about Scooby in the Q&As. He's amazing with those two characters. However, the S plus tier is where we have our top 4. We'll start off with Ranger Danger. Now, maybe questionable to some, to me, very unquestionable. Ranger is literally the equivalent of a Swiss Army knife. He could play anybody. He'd do customs against every team in the game. Well, not every team, you're not going to see him against randoms, but he'd play against every good SWAT team and use every mastermind. And he'd at least be competitive. He'd sometimes win with his weaker, in quotation marks, builds. Excellent player. Really good with every mastermind. His Samuel, quite underrated actually. His Samuel was very hard to kill. He was a good Valerie. Yeah, this guy just had, again, I've used the word once, I'll use it again. He had an encyclopedic knowledge of the game. He knew his numbers. He knew what to do and when to do it. That cannot be underestimated by any degree, and it hasn't by me. Rightfully, Ranger Danger S plus tier. And honestly, if he was still around today, I think he'd prove that even more so. He dipped out of the game at about just around the time where the level of gameplay went up a notch even higher. And I think Ranger would have just adapted to that environment even more. And yeah, honestly, just a marvel to watch his mastermind streams sometimes. The customs, as I say, especially. Anyway, top 3 time, and we'll go with our most versatile player in bronze, Toxic Nico 2. Let's start with masterminds. He's a good Nikolai. There you go. He's a very good Nikolai, but that isn't his speciality, because this man can play literally every survivor. I've seen him pull off 9 out of 10 matches in terms of performance with everybody. Literally everybody. Valerie, excellent. January, he can do it if needed. Tyrone, the best. Samuel, brilliant. Jill, honestly, his Jill, top tier, ridiculously good. His Becca, he can do it. His Martin, really, really good. Adrian is the most versatile player in the game, without question. And you had to have him on any survivor team to fill any role if there was a gap. He was just that good. Silver medal, ultimately, in this tier list goes to Habiba HMI. probably the single most talented January overall. Like, we will see with number one. I think you can guess who it is now. But even compared to him, Kara just had an uncanny knack of ridiculously flashy 20s. January is probably the hardest character to play at the highest level, so ultimately being great with her gets you S tier upwards. But Kara's pure talent, and let's not forget it, Kara came back after a break, she practiced for a bit, and then she was insane. Like, if she was here from the very start, got picked up by a SWAT team early, should just be undeniably, well, I mean, she's second already in my tier list, but ridiculous potential. She made every Nikolai sweat. We had some amazing matches with her. Where she falls short, I think she is a pure cam killer with Jan, rather than being top tier at creature and gun builds. I believe she focused maybe a bit too much on beating Nikolai's, but ultimately that's what her craft is known for. That's why everybody rated her so highly, and yeah, ultimately levels out to a silver medal here. And number one, it's Dominic. It's just Dominic. He's the best Annette in the game. He's the best Jan in the game. He's amazing with Jill. Dominic is the iconic Resistance player as far as I'm concerned. I'll gladly watch his YouTube uploads back to back to back to learn things about the game. The guy, honestly, again, I've never seen a player mentioned by other players as much as Dom is. Like, before I'd even played with Dom, or even watched Dom, I'd heard about him. People had mentioned his name, people had said, this is the Jan. And then I saw him play, and yeah, he was the Jan. Like, I haven't played with anybody where before I played with them for the first time, I had such like a anticipation to see just how good they were. Like, the first time I played with, say, Pep, I was like, yeah, this guy's great with Samuel. But when I was about to play with Dom, I was like, shit, what are we going to learn today? And I learned quite a bit. I could go on all day, to be honest, but Dom takes my gold medal, I think rightfully so. And that will wrap up the tier list. I have rambled on for a while. It has been great, though, and I hope you've all enjoyed it. It's been a joy. I hope I've been fair, honest, and balanced with what I've said. I think I've done as good a job as I can, to be honest. I did want to include more players, but as you can see, we've gone on for this amount of time just on 50-odd. So I don't want to make this an absolute movie marathon for all of you. So this is where it concludes for now. It's been a pleasure nevertheless. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you want any other ideas for video series going forward, do let me know. I'm always open to suggestions. But until then, that will wrap up today. Thank you for listening. And until you give me something else to tier list, goodbye.